Before getting into the nitty-gritty of the life of Moshe Rabbeinu, the OG prophet, liberator, lawgiver, and all-around monumental figure in Jewish history, it will be necessary to mention the fact that if Moshe Rabbeinu was indeed a historical figure, we'd expect to find some mention of him in non-biblical sources. However, no direct, uncontested reference to him exists outside of religious texts. That said, there are several intriguing parallels and theories based on Egyptian, Near Eastern, and archaeological records. So our first task must be to explore some of these parallels. If we're going full deep dive, buckle up, because Moshe's story is layered with history, theology, and legend. While no known Egyptian records explicitly name Moses, Moshe in Hebrew, some historical figures and events bear resemblance to his story. The Ipuwer papyrus in the 13th to 17th century BCE is an ancient Egyptian text known as the Admonitions of Ipuwer, and it describes plagues, chaos, and a collapse of order in Egypt. It mentions the Nile turning to blood, slaves rebelling, and Egypt in turmoil. Some scholars compare it to the 10 plagues. However, it's debated whether this document refers to a real event or simply apocalyptic poetry. Akhenaten and monotheism from 1350 BCE follows Pharaoh Akhenaten, or Amenhotep IV, who tried to establish Atenism, a form of monotheism worshiping the sun god Aten. He rejected Egypt's polytheistic traditions just as Moshe rejected idol worship. Some speculate that Moshe was a follower or even a priest of Akhenaten and continued monotheism after Akhenaten's fall. In the 3rd century BCE, Manetho, an Egyptian historian writing in Greek, described a rebel priest named Osarseph, who led a group of lepers out of Egypt. Osarseph supposedly adopted the name Moses and led an uprising against Pharaoh. Some scholars think this might be a distorted retelling of the Exodus. Next, we have Canaanite and Near Eastern sources. While there's no direct mention of Moshe, some regional stories echo elements of his life, such as the birth legend, parallel with Sargon of Akkad. The legend of Sargon of Akkad, circa 2300 BCE, tells of a baby placed in a reed basket and set adrift in a river, only to be found and raised by a royal figure. This bears an uncanny resemblance to Moshe's infancy story in Exodus. Then there is the Hyksos expulsion in 1550 BCE. The Hyksos were a Semitic people who ruled Egypt, but were later expelled. Some suggest that this might have inspired the story of the Israelites' departure. However, the Hyksos were rulers, not slaves, so it's not a perfect match. And during the Hyksos would have been about the time of Joseph, as being part of the leadership and royalty of Egypt at the time. There are some Greek and Roman writers on the character of Moshe. Several ancient historians wrote about Moshe, often portraying him as a philosopher or a lawgiver, such as Hecataeus of Edinburgh in the 4th century BCE, who was a Greek historian that described Moshe as a wise Egyptian priest who led his people out of Egypt. Strabo, around the 1st century BCE, was a famous geographer who claimed Moshe was an Egyptian who rejected idol worship and founded a new way of life based on monotheism. Roman and Jewish historians Tacitus and Josephus, circa 1st century CE, spoke of Moshe. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote that the Hebrews were exiles from Egypt following a leader named Moshe who instituted new religious practices, while Josephus, the Jewish historian, defended Moshe's leadership and the Exodus story in his famous Antiquities of the Jews. Do we have any solid archaeological evidence at this time, of the writings and recordings for the existence of Moshe? Sadly, to date, there is no direct archaeological proof of Moshe or the Exodus. Some scholars point to Semitic slave settlements in Egypt like Avaris as indirect evidence. However, the lack of Egyptian records is often explained by the fact that Egyptians did not record defeats or embarrassing events, a common practice among ancient potentates. So before taking a deep dive into who the Hebrew Bible tells us who Moshe is, from the non-biblical sources, he is myth, history, or a bit of both. The religious view states unequivocally that Moshe was a real person, divinely inspired, and led the Israelites to freedom. Historically, the view is stated that Moshe may have been a composite figure, based on various leaders, priests, or exiled groups. The skeptical view believes that Moses is a mythic character created to unite a scattered Semitic Canaanite peoples under a single religious and legal tradition within the boundaries of historical Canaan. While there's no direct historical smoking gun, the Moshe narrative aligns with real historical themes. The well-known fact of Egyptian oppression, Semitic migrations, and monotheistic revolutions cannot be ignored. So then, who was Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe, or Moses, is considered the greatest prophet in Jewish tradition. The title Rabbeinu literally means our teacher, signifying his role as the ultimate transmitter of the Torah. His life is chronicled primarily in the books of Shemot, Exodus, Vayikra, Leviticus, Bamidbar, Numbers, and Devarim, Deuteronomy, or the Torah. From these Torah writings, we learn that Moshe was born in Egypt when Pharaoh had decreed that all Israelite male infants be killed, Shemot 1:22. His mother Yocheved placed him in a basket in the Nile to save him, where he was rescued and raised by Batya, Pharaoh's daughter. Despite his Egyptian upbringing, Moshe remained connected to his Hebrew identity, thanks in great part to the story for having Moshe breastfed, weaned, and learning all he learned about his true heritage as an Israelite from his real mother, who was hired by Batya to care for the baby Moshe. At age 40, Moshe exiled himself from Egypt to Midian after accidentally killing an Egyptian taskmaster for beating a Hebrew slave, Shemot 2:11-15. He lived in Midian, married Tzipporah, daughter of Yitro or Jethro, and became a shepherd for the next 40 years. Moshe encountered Hashem in the burning bush, the Sneh, at age 80 on Mount Horeb, Shemot 3. He reluctantly accepted his divine mission to free the Israelites. He meets up with his older brother Aaron, where Moshe relates to him all that must now transpire. The divine plan for the exodus from Egypt is now in full swing. Moshe confronts Pharaoh with the famous phrase, "Let my people go." Hashem, over the period of a year, brings 10 plagues upon Egypt, culminating in the death of the firstborn, Makat Becharot. After admitting defeat, the Pharaoh tells Moshe to leave and lead Bnei Israel out of Egypt, splitting the Yam Suf, or the Sea of Reeds, with a combination of natural and divine power. Many other miracles occurred, including receiving manna from heaven, the guiding of Israel through the wilderness by a pillar of smoke during the day and a pillar of fire during the night. The biggest life-altering event to take place during this 40-year journey to the Promised Land was Matan Torah, the receiving of Torah at Horeb/Sinai. Moshe ascended Hor Horeb and received the Torah, including the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments. Upon coming down from the mountain and witnessing the idolatrous golden calf incident, Moshe broke the first set of tablets carved by the hand of Hashem. When he saw the blasphemous behavior of the people, he risked his life to save. He spent 40 days and nights more on Horeb/Sinai, receiving the Torah again into stone by his own hand this time. Moshe served as the ultimate intermediary between Hashem and the people the rest of his entire life. During the 40-year journey, Moshe and Bnei Israel faced many trials and challenges. Moshe and the faithful faced constant rebellion from their fellow Jews and others they came into contact with over their caravan trek. For example, Korach's uprising, Bamidbar 16, Numbers 16. Constant complaints about food and water, Numbers 11 and 20. The 12 spies incident, leading to 40 years of wandering, Numbers 13-14. The struggles he had with leadership, particularly with Bnei Israel's constant wavering faith. Moshe's own failure of faith when he struck the rock at Mei Meribah instead of speaking to it, Numbers 20, and Moshe's death after Hashem decreed that he would not enter Eretz Yisrael. Upon hearing this from source, Moshe transferred leadership to Yehoshua Bar Nun, or Joshua. Moshe dies on Har Nevo at the age of 120, while gazing upon the promised land, but never entering it, Devarim 34. The Torah then says, Hashem himself buried Moshe, and his grave remains unknown to this day. Of course, Moshe can be found throughout the Midrash, Talmud, and Kabbalah. Midrashim say he was born circumcised and that the Nile carried him directly to Pharaoh's palace. The Talmud in Menachot 29b states Moshe saw Rabbi Akiva's teachings and questioned why he wasn't given the Torah instead of Moshe. The Zohar and Kabbalah link Moshe to Tikkun Olam and the Messianic process. Some within Jewish mystical traditions suggest Moshe So is reincarnated in every generation's great leader. So, what is Moshe's legacy in Jewish thought? He is known as the greatest prophet, yet he was described as the most humble of all men, Numbers 12:3. The Torah ends with these words, There never arose a prophet in Israel like Moshe, whom Hashem knew face to face, Devarim 34:10. He is considered the model of leadership, faith, and humility. How did Moshe fare within other traditions and belief systems? Well, Christianity sees Moshe as a prototype of Jesus as a lawgiver and mediator between God and mankind. Islam calls him by the name Musa and is one of the most revered prophets in the Quran and throughout all the sects of Islam. Sigmund Freud and others who hold to his psychological leanings argue Moshe was an Egyptian who introduced monotheism. My thoughts about this man? Moshe's story is not just history. It's a blueprint for leadership, faith, and struggle. His life is filled with paradoxes. He was raised as an Egyptian, yet became Israel's leader, spoke slowly with a speech impediment, but delivered Hashem's words clearly, saw the divine, but could not enter the promised land. His legacy is everywhere. In halakha, or Jewish law, philosophy, mysticism, psychology, and ethics. Without Moshe, there's no Torah, as we know it, no Judaism, and arguably no Western concept of law and morality. What and who do I think Moshe was? He was a man handpicked for a destiny that, over the last 3,400 years, has literally changed the world. He may not have been the first human being to introduce ethical and legal behavior for human civilization. He is, however, the first and only human being to have been given divine law that has forged within the hearts and minds of all humanity and what it means to be a tzaddik, a right-thinking, right-living, and humanely, divinely inspired leader. I want to thank you for tuning in to Shmu's Views. I appreciate our time together and hope you find my videos and written essays of help in your life. All my videos can be found on Rumble and YouTube and across the various social media platforms. Links to my Shmu's Views local Substack and Blogger page are in the description below this video. Please like and subscribe and share with others. And until next time, I want to wish you Shalom.